downloading this episode of Cork Talk with me, Tim Atkin. A weekly conversation with some of the most famous people in the world of wine. Victoria Mason was working as a plant buyer at Waitrose when she heard about a vacancy in the wine department. She got the job and has never looked back. A long-distance runner and serial high achiever, she has the energy and enthusiasm of three people. Victoria is a master of wine, an expert on regenerative viticulture, and a buyer at the Wine Society, where she's in charge of South Africa, Beaujolais, Chablis, and the Mâconnais. Hello, Victoria, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Tim. Thanks so much for having me.
Nice to hear your voice. Where are you in the world? South Africa?
Sadly not. No, in heatwave London, trying to keep cool.
Oh, God, I know the feeling anyway. Right, lots to talk about, particularly South Africa, but also regenerative agriculture, which is going to be fascinating. But a bit about you, first of all, because you were brought up near Manchester, a place called Stalybridge. Links with wine in your family? No vineyards up there, of course, but I mean, your parents weren't in wine, were they, anything like that?
No, I think there are actually a few vineyards in the northwest of the country now, Tim, but no, I'm not sure they were there when I was growing up. No specific links to wine. My parents, they definitely did drink wine when I was growing up, but it would have been sort of big brands. It would have been wine that they bought from the supermarket. There wasn't a cellar, there wasn't a wine culture, but there would have been wine around.
But no overseas, holidays to wine regions, nothing like that.
No, but there is one that stands out. So when I was probably 16 or 17, we were in Italy and we were in Tuscany. And I remember us going to a wine tasting. I have no idea where we were. I don't know whether we were in Chianti Classico or Montalcino. We were somewhere. And we went to, we part of an organised trip to a wine tasting. And I just remember us sitting outside in surrounded by olive groves, actually, fresh bread on the table, fresh olive oil on the table, and obviously drinking wine, tasting wine. I imagine it was Sangiovese, but again, I don't know. But that memory of a table full of people and just the kind of conviviality, the spirit, the fact we were also outside was definitely a memory that sort of stayed with me and stood out as something special.
Yeah, and you had an Italian godmother as well, didn't you? Was she a wine drinker? Presumably she was.
Yes. My Auntie Cam, she is from Calabria, and I think from me being as little as around 4 or 5, I was definitely drinking red wine and lemonade. I'm sure it was, 1 part red wine to 10 parts lemonade, but that was a memory from family parties.
So anyway, studies. You studied English, comparative literature at Warwick, then you did an MPhil, again in English, Cambridge. It's earning distinctions twice. You sound like a born overachiever. Why English? Do you have a career in mind at that time?
No, I no career in mind. I don't think I had a career in mind until I started working. But English, it was about my love of words. I loved both reading and writing. Still love the different perspectives and worldviews that reading literature gave you, the chance to inhabit another world. And yeah, it was where my passion lay. And I guess from a relatively young age, I've sort of believed in following the things that pull me, and I was pulled towards studying literature. So.
Oh, I agree with that. Favourite book? Can you give us a favourite book?
Yeah, Tim, this is like the question you get as a wine lover. What's your favourite wine?
Lots of them.
Lots of them. I mean, I think there is a book, the book that sort of, I guess, not defined, but was really important to me when I was a teenager, was a big old fat book. It was Lord of the Rings, the trilogy. It was actually an absolutely kind of worn, well-thumbed copy. It was all kind of 1,000 pages in one copy, tiny writing, which belonged to my dad. And I remember reading it in the mountains in France, and I just loved the epic scale and the adventure and, fighting evil. So that was definitely a book of my teens. And then a book of my 20s, actually, from studying was Primo Levi's If This Is a Man, which tells the story of him surviving Auschwitz, essentially. And it was a book that I then went on to study, actually, in my master's. But it was a book that, for me, showed both the very worst of what man is capable of, and also the very best. And it showed how stories and storytelling can really, truly be life-saving. So it was, a book that has stayed with me for many years.
Yeah. And after university, you got a job as a graduate trainee at Waitrose, and you worked in the stores, then you did customer services, then a trainee buyer, and didn't know this about you, that you bought chutney, pickles, and then plants, right? What did that time teach you?
Sounds relatively eclectic. I think that if there's one common thread throughout all of those roles, so being on the shop floor, I was on the shop floor for 3 years, and then moving into head office as a trainee buyer, it's people, it's relationships, and that is from that first day on the shop floor managing teams, because that was essentially a management trainee role, understanding the different people that you worked with, understanding how to get the best out of them was critical. And as a 22-year-old, 23-year-old, sort of fresh from university and studies, that's quite tough. But it was something that I enjoyed and something that I think I had a natural affinity for. And then that same sort of skill set is absolutely at the heart of being a good buyer. I believe it's so much about how you work with your supply base, but not just with your supply base, how you work with the people around you in your business to get the best for the categories, or now that I'm buying wine, the regions, the countries that you're buying. So yeah, definitely the people thing.
And is that what makes a good buyer, is having relationships or understanding people, do you think?
I think, and in wine even more so, it's a people business. It's not the only skill, and obviously there's a certain degree of commercial acumen that you need. I think there's also quite a lot of creativity in buying. You have to have an eye on the future. You have to have an eye on what's next. From a food perspective, when I was working kind of more with ingredients and world cuisines, it was kind of, what are the next big trends? What are people excited about? And you can also create trends. So there's definitely a sense of creativity and vision and being tuned into what people want. All of those things come together, as well as a strong kind of commercial foundation and understanding of the numbers.
And how did you move from plants into wine? Because it looks like you were already studying wine in your spare time, weren't you? Was it a natural link with plants? I mean, vines are plants, aren't they?
Absolutely, almost seamless. So my studying of wine actually began pretty much as soon as after I transitioned from the shop floor, from working in stores into head office, and I suddenly had a more I had a regular working pattern instead of working nights, evenings, and all the rest of it. I was really keen to do a wine course. My interest had been piqued when I was on the shop floor, when I was in the wine departments of Waitrose. And when I sort of had those sort of more regular hours, I could start studying wine. So I started with an introduction to wine course at Berry Brothers with the very wonderful Rebecca Lemon, who this was a 6-week course, 6 Tuesday nights, sort of 3 or 4 hours. And she absolutely inspired me and pulled me in. So that got the fascination going, and I went on to do my level 2 with the Wines and Spirits Education Trust, and my level 3, and all this was just as a hobby. It was sort of it was in my spare time. And I really hadn't considered wine. Didn't feel like it was a career that was accessible to me. I was obviously surrounded by the wine buyers at Waitrose, but that was a team with huge expertise and experience. There was a team with, I think, the most masters of wine in the country as buyers, and I didn't realize that was a door that was going to open. So I was simply pursuing my studies because I enjoyed it, and I was learning and being challenged in lots of different directions. And then something happened in early 2016, which was that there were not 1 but 2 vacancies in the wine department at Waitrose, and that never happened, because much like the Wine Society, buyers stay at Waitrose for many, many years. And I think at that point, I just got my level 3 results for WSET, and I passed. I'd won a prize, and I put my hat in the ring for it. And I think,
and they said yes. Yeah.
They went through a grueling interview process, which involved blind tasting, which, when you've only got your level 3 and not very much wine experience, is quite nerve-wracking. But yes, I got the role, and I started in June 2016 as a wine buyer.
And you started buying what? South Africa, I know. And Italy? Were you buying Italy?
Italy came a little later, actually. So my original regions when I started in 16 was South Africa and the Loire. So I was self-designated Queen of Chenin, and that love continues, as you know. And I also bought alternative formats, so sort of your bag and box, your small bottles, and what was then designated rest of the world.
Yeah.
So wines from Romania and Bulgaria and Lebanon and so on. And then Italy came later. Italy came in 2019 when we had a restructure. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I mean, is it easier buying wine for something like Waitrose than it is for, say, a discounter? You know, does the fact that many of your customers have got a reasonable amount of disposable income give you a degree of flexibility as a buyer?
I think it's different. I mean, I've never bought wine for a discounter, but I think that within the grocery market, within that context, Waitrose has quite a significantly higher average bottle price than the market. So at the time that I was there, it's a few years out of date now, but our average bottle price was around £8.50, whereas the market was around £6.50. Yeah. So it did give us, it meant that we were generally, we were working with an overall more premium product, but also a key part of Waitrose's sort of wine philosophy then and for sort of 2-3 decades preceding that was to offer breadth and depth. Now, nothing like the breadth of depth of an independent or of the wine society, but breadth and depth compared to a supermarket. So it meant that within the South African context, you know, I could buy Sunso, I could buy white Rhone blends. So definitely there was more freedom, and it wasn't just about high volume, low prices.
And when was your first trip to South Africa? Can you still remember it? But you can.
Yes, vividly. The first trip was in February 2017, and I spent over a month there. So escaping kind of the darkest month, I guess, of British winter in a sense. So I did a 2-week buying trip with Maria Eleanor, who is both my mentor and my predecessor as South Africa buyer at Waitrose, amazing woman, great friend. So we did 2 weeks buying, and then she flew home, and I had extended the trip with holiday to do my first harvest, and which has become something of a trend for me to do these harvest holidays. So after that buying trip, I spent just over 2 weeks on the Siemensberg working at Rustenburg. So I was literally living in the John X. Merriman's old house, just a stone's throw away from the cellar, and I got to see almost kind of the heart of the harvest season in the Sauvignon and Chardonnay was still coming in, was just finishing coming in. The Reds, the Merlot and Malbec were starting to come in. We weren't yet with the cabs, but I got to see everything, and I got to do everything from picking to pump overs to filling barrels to inoculating ferments. So that was kind of quite a
useful
initiation. Yeah.
And why have you developed such a strong bond with the country? I mean, you've got lots of friends there, haven't you? And they love you, clearly. But why South Africa, do you think?
I mean, I think that's something that you also know the answer to as a South African wine lover. It's a country that it imprinted on me from the beginning, both in terms of the sort of the dramatic, stunningly beautiful, wild landscape, which just, it feels, there's so much energy there. There's a kind of raw energy in the land. And then, of course, the people, I came into South Africa as very inexperienced wine professional. Less than 6 months of buying wine at that point. I was studying my diploma. And I came and I was nervous and I was somewhat intimidated, by wine. And I came into this environment where everyone just greeted me with open arms, with open hearts, so happy to teach, so generous with their time, with the wines they shared. And obviously, I also love the wine. So it's kind of like the layering of the landscape, the people, the wines, and it just drew me in. And as you know, the rest is history.
Perfect combination. I mean, after 13 years, I think you were at Waitrose in total, you went to Bordeaux Index, which is a fine wine focus, basically. I just wonder, is the fine wine world very different from the rest of the wine industry? I mean, it strikes me as quite conservative, but is that changing maybe? I mean, I've said to you, and I think you agree, that fine wine doesn't just have to come from the classic areas anymore, does it?
Absolutely not, and absolutely not the wine society where we're all about discovery. So it was fascinating for me. I was at a point in my career where I had been completely at the grocery end of the market. Yes, for Waitrose, yes, for a premium supermarket, but equally it was one way of doing business, one way of buying wine, and one way of communicating with customers, which is essentially shelves on the shop floor and price points, labels, and, rather than a direct personal connection with your customers. Fine wine, the way that it operates in London with the fine wine merchants, there is that kind of personal relationship with the sales team and their clients. It is, so that is, the means of selling wine is very different. I think that Bordeaux Index is a fine wine merchant, but also a fine wine trader. And it was this trading aspect of wine that I had actually no experience of, but also really no expectation about. And I think what I learned there, surprisingly perhaps, or unexpectedly, was that when you are trading wine, there are actually more synergies than you might think with the sort of, even though you're working at the very highest price point with lower price wines, because you're essentially treating wine as a commodity. And if the same principles hold true, if the price is right, you will sell X amount of volume, whether you're talking about first growth Bordeaux or whether you're talking about £5 Pinot Grigio. So I found some strange sort of parallels. And I also found where my own interest sort of lies, which was between those. Like, I'm not interested in wine as a commodity. I'm interested in wine as a story and as a living thing, and all the people and places behind it. So that was interesting for me, just in terms of finding my direction in my career. In terms of whether it's conservative, yes, I don't think all fine wine merchants are, but certainly in that Bordeaux Index setting, it's still very much dominated by France.
It's in the name, isn't it, really?
yeah, you could have worked that one out, absolutely. And even Barolo, for example, would be sort of an exotic region, an exotic wine, so to speak. Although I did do Bordeaux Index's first ever Santorini Acertico offer. We actually did two in the time that I was there, which was fantastic. So there was starting to be moves in the direction where you're not just looking at the classic regions for fine wine, but I think that yes, that still is what prevails. But I think it's also what holds back the fine wine market in general, the fact that it's not prepared to explore and to work harder beyond those classic established regions.
I think you're right. And, Bordeaux is not the easy sell it once was in terms of en primeur, is it? I mean, I think all the fine wine merchants are struggling to sell young Bordeaux. So they've had to look elsewhere. And that includes South Africa, doesn't it? Which is, you did that, I think, when you were there as well, didn't you? Did various South Africa offers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. I think probably even just in the last 3 to 5 years or sort of post-pandemic, I think that there has been more exploration and discovery beyond simply Bordeaux, Burgundy, the Rhone.
Yeah, hallelujah. What made you want to become a master of wine? And tell us that. And then any tips you'd pass on to anybody who's contemplating doing the course, beginning the marathon, the first steps of the marathon?
I think it was, for me, as I started to settle into that first wine buying role 10 years ago now, it was abundantly clear for me that this was my field, that this was the place, this is what I wanted to do for my whole career. I want to be in wine. Maybe there would be different roles within that. But given I knew that this was for me, it kind of was natural for me to therefore want to aspire to the highest qualification in that field, and not for the qualification's sake, but because I have this like huge appetite for learning, and I wanted to learn as much as possible, as quickly as possible, so that ultimately I could actually be a more valuable contributor to the wine industry. So it felt like immersing myself in the Master of Wine was the route to growing my knowledge exponentially in a short space of time, which is also very true. So that was really why I wanted to do it. And the things that you have to study, learn, get a grip on within that program, there is no way I would have sat here studying, total SO2 and free SO2 and the impact of that on the antimicrobial properties of the wine. There's just no way I would have studied that. But my understanding of that makes me a better buyer, makes me a better wine buyer. And I think just makes me better at my job overall. So it was what I wanted it to be. It sort of accelerated my knowledge and has enabled me to contribute back. In terms of tips for someone about to start on the program, I think you just have to be prepared. You have to want to do this you have to be so committed to it. It's going to take up a lot of your time. So you have to be driven. It has to be something that is also giving you satisfaction and pleasure. Not all the time. Clearly, there are some moments when it's just hard and it's a slog. But ultimately, you have to find it enriching, because that's the only way you're going to put in the number of hours that it requires you to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, ask yourself the question: do you really want to do it? Are you doing it for yourself?
It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And I just wonder whether you think it's important as a wine buyer, and now you're obviously a master of wine, to have worked in cellars. You talked about that early experience that you had at Rustenburg, and I think you've done 2 more harvests, and you've worked in vineyards as well. What were the most important lessons you've learned from those 3 harvests, or working harvests, but also the pruning session you did? I think, didn't you do a sort of week of pruning somewhere in the Northern Cape?
Yeah, I learned I'm not very good at pruning. I actually, on the pruning side of things, I just learned what an incredible skilled task it is, and that we should talk and think about vineyard work as skilled labor. And the more we start to do that, and obviously inspirational figures like Rosa Kruger, who cannot not reference here with the work she's doing with vineyard workers in South Africa, the more we start to acknowledge that this work is so critical, not only to the quality of the wine, the resultant wine, but to the longevity of the vine. So I think for me, the only way I was going to understand that was not reading it in books, watching webinars around the different methods. It was going to be actually standing in the vineyard with a secateurs in my hand, getting a blister because my hands are so soft, because let's face it, I spend most of my time at the laptop. So that was really critical. So I think in terms of how important it is to work harvest or work in the vineyards as a wine buyer, for me, it's a very personal thing. It's because I like hands-on experience. I like to feel physically connected with what is this incredible product that I am then buying and ultimately selling. I don't think it's essential. It's not clearly, you don't need it as a wine buyer, and many wine buyers won't have done that. But I think it helps in terms of come back to that thing of relationships with the people I'm working with, my empathy with what they're facing, but also just the way I can communicate to the end consumer. Obviously at the Wine Society, that's our members, but more in general, as a master of wine, you and I, a huge part of our job, whatever our actual day job is about communicating about wine. And I feel that I can communicate that so much more strongly with this direct
you've done
experience.
It. Yeah. And you've made a wine, haven't you? It's coming out soon. Isn't that right?
I'm not sure I can quite claim having made the wine in its entirety, but I do have a collaboration wine coming out early, probably at the beginning of next year, actually, though you might get a chance to taste it in autumn. So this is the result of the 2025 harvest, the amazing 2025 harvest, albeit in the Swartland. So I worked with Donovan Rawl. I was determined to work with him and do a Syrah harvest. So I specifically spent basically 2 weeks in vats of Syrah, stumping those grapes, because Donovan works entirely whole bunch, and all those grapes are foot trodden. So the very first day that I was working with him, we went out to sample in this incredible vineyard that he works with, sort of not so far from the Casteelberg, not so far from where his cellar is. So it's a 10-hectare Syrah vineyard, which goes into his amazing Ava Syrah as well as his concrete Syrah. We sampled the vineyard and we picked that first ton the next day, and Donovan sort of called it the sacrificial ton, in the sense that we wanted to get it in the cellar, see how the analysis was looking once it was actually in the cellar, because sometimes it can be quite different from when you're sampling in the vineyard, get a sense of the tannin profiles and all the rest of it. So that sacrificial ton came into the cellar. I went into the first vat, the first sort of, it's almost like a big white tub really. And Donovan said to me, "That's your ton. You need to keep an eye on that ton." Now, the truth is I obviously kept an eye on all the tons, but that specific ton was from the beginning of my harvest to the end of my harvest, in the sense that on my last day, it had almost finished, it was almost fermented to dryness. So there's like about 2 grams residual left, and it was tasting amazing. It went to barrel as its own component with my initials on it. So I sort of started to call it my Syrah, but actually more often our Syrah. But when Donovan came to blending for his main Syrah, his concrete Syrah, and then his Ava Syrah, that single component on its own was something. It was too intense. It was too tannic as a standalone component. I don't know what that tells you about me, but anyway, so it was then Donovan blended it with some of his concrete Syrah and also some of the offcuts from the Ava Syrah, so some of the Foudre, and has created this sort of really gorgeous, like textbook Swartland Syrah, but with an earlier approachability than his other Syrahs. Yeah. So we have called it Onsvin, our wine.
Our wine, right.
And it's a celebration of sort of the Swartland, friendship, spontaneity, and obviously Syrah.
I can't wait to try it. But listen, I want to talk a bit more about viticulture, because your MW dissertation, award-winning, of course, again, was about regenerative agriculture, regenerative viticulture, really. Can you just define regenerative viticulture for us briefly? I mean, that's like, it's impossible to do that in a few sentences, but could you just say, what is it for somebody listening to this, and how does it differ from, say, organic viticulture or biodynamic viticulture?
Sure. I mean, it took me 1,000 words, I think, in my research paper to define it. Okay, so I think it's best to think about it in terms of the outcomes, in terms of the impact on the soil and the vineyard ecosystem. So essentially, there are two main outcomes of regenerative farming, and that is improving soil health. And soil health is all about soil life and all those active microbial networks, as well as insect life in the actual soils. And that also comes with, therefore, increasing organic matter and carbon stocks in the soils. So first outcome, improve soil health. And second outcome, enhance biodiversity. And that is both under the ground as well as above the ground and around the vineyard. It's a phrase, it's a term which has accelerated in our usage in the last 10 years, but particularly so in the last 5 years. But essentially, this way of farming it's about going back to an old way of farming without the agrochemical inputs, which sort of followed the world wars and sort of that kind of the advent of industrial ag. There is probably best thinking about it in terms of principles. So in the vineyard setting, the key principles are limiting soil disturbance. So that is both kind of physical and mechanical disturbance, like, for example, tilling the soil, but it also includes chemical disturbance, so using agrochemicals of all sorts, from pesticides to herbicides. Fertilizers also count clearly as agrochemicals. Building diversity, and that can be done in the vineyard through cover crops, for example, as well as through interplanting with trees. Keeping that ground covered, so you don't want to see bare soil. This is one of the key tenets of regenerative agriculture and viticulture. Bare soil doesn't exist in nature. Bare soil is extremely exposed, therefore, to evaporation, to hot temperatures. The differences between the temperature in bare soil and the temperature in cover crops are significant. Integrating animals is another key principle into that whole vineyard operation for a multitude of different purposes, and then treating that whole vineyard as an ecosystem. So those are kind of the key principles across.
And which animals? I mean, you tend to, you certainly see cows in there, don't you? Chickens? What else do you get in there?
Yeah, I mean, actually, but you say you certainly see cows. That's quite unique, not sheep. Unique, but that's quite rare to South Africa. Yeah. Yes, definitely sheep. So this is using the animals to sort of as part of the cover crop management scheme in winter. So with winter grazing. Chickens, yes. Ducks, yes. And this can be for pest control. So, for example, Rustenburg at the moment are using ducks to basically as snail patrol to try and deal with the snail problem instead of using insecticides. But actually, and it's not just using the animals, it's also using the products of the animals. So obviously using the manure, all of that, which actually is full of microbial diversity and richness, which can then go into the soil. So essentially, it's a phrase we're using now. But it describes many ancient practices of interacting and relating with nature, and basically working with nature rather than coming in and layering on inputs after inputs. and in a way which is, frankly, I mean, it's not sustainable, but it's also actually degrading the soil. We need to restore and revitalize the soil. And with that, we therefore then increase the water holding capacity. We increase the potential for, so basically soil health equals vine health, or soil health equals plant health equals human health.
Yeah, I think that makes sort of sense. And what about this thing with organics and biodynamics? I mean, it has many things in common with those two things as well, doesn't it? I mean, they're both respecting the soil as well, just from a slightly different perspective in terms of, I don't know, some of the preparations they're using, interpreting, certainly in biodynamics.
Yes, and I think probably biodynamics is almost the closest sort of synergy with the regenerative system, because because of that kind of holistic approach and that self-sufficient approach. But obviously, it's quite specific in terms of, as you just said, the preparations that you have to follow and use. The regenerative sort of toolkit, let's say, is more open and is not and is really focused on doing the right practices for your context. So, when I have discussions with growers about biodynamics, some of those preparations, some of the plants which are used in the preparations are not native to their region. And so it doesn't necessarily make sense to therefore bring in non-native plants to create a preparation to improve the soil. So regenerative kind of, it is not as prescriptive as that. There are those that would argue that therefore means that sort of amorphousness is both a negative and a positive. A negative because then it lends it open for greenwashing and for people saying they're regenerative when they're not. But a positive in the fact that this is such an embryonic sort of nascent field that we're still learning, and we shouldn't therefore constrain ourselves with rules and with boxes. That said, there are now a number of regenerative certifications around the world, and probably the leading one is actually ROC, which is Regenerative Organic Certified. So ROC actually requires organic as a baseline, so that requires that you're not using any synthetic inputs before you can then build on that. And again, there are then multiple fields of thought as to whether that is the right way to do it or not, because it means that it's quite hard to therefore get into regenerative. And the whole point about regenerative was being inclusive and getting people on that journey without requiring them to start off by being organic certified. So there's lots of different trains of thought, but essentially it's a toolkit which can be transposed to different environments and can be super, super specific and local to that farm. And it really encourages observation and knowing your vineyard and knowing the vines.
I like that. You've got to be in the place. Yeah. You've been at the Wine Society. We mentioned the Wine Society already, but I think you've been there, 2 years, maybe 3 years now, is it? First as a maternity cover, now you're a wine buyer, but you're a wine buyer and climate and nature lead. What does the second bit of that involve? It's some of the stuff you're talking about, really. But it's working with producers who are doing that, or using those techniques?
Exactly, yes. So the Wine Society launched a climate and nature program in 2024. Actually, the announcement of the launch was one of the reasons that really propelled me to apply for the job, which was a temporary job at the time as a buyer. So the climate and nature program is a fixed amount of funding, an annual funding pot each year, which our growers can apply to in order to participate in regenerative practices in the vineyard, or projects or trials that improve soil organic carbon, improve biodiversity. So essentially, I'm working very closely with our Director of Sustainability, Dom, who conceived the programme, as well as a couple of external judges. So we get applications in from our producers. We judge all of the projects that they're putting forward in terms of their impact on improving biodiversity and soil health. And then we award the funding accordingly. So in 2024, we had 11 winners from around the world. Last year, we had 13 winners. But essentially, it's a way of investing in our growers to help them move in a direction towards a more regenerative and restorative form of viticulture.
Okay, yeah, interesting.
So, yeah, it's exactly what I'm interested in, basically.
No, that sounds great. I mean, you now buy South Africa, surprise, surprise, but also Beaujolais, Chablis and the Mâconnais, which are kind of greater Burgundy, really. I mean, everybody knows about your knowledge of South Africa. I just wonder, is it challenging to take on an established region like Burgundy that you're less familiar with? Where do you start? I mean, a place like that.
It is challenging. I'm at the beginning of that journey. I've done 2 trips now shadowing, alongside our existing Burgundy buyer, Toby, and who's been buying the region for 30 years. So I think the first thing to say is that Wine Society is amazing because it allows this long handover period. So I haven't been thrown in. I am there by his side, asking all the questions, learning. So yeah, of course there's an element of it being daunting, but I've got a great support network in place. And also I've just got my natural curiosity. So I'm excited to learn something new, and I'm excited to get into kind of microscopic detail. I guess if there's one region that my brain probably will really enjoy, it's Burgundy.
It's Burgundy. And you're learning French, aren't you?
Well, I'm just starting actually French lessons this afternoon, and I've got a course in September. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds good. Let's talk about South Africa, because you're still launched a fine wine focus. It's still running, I think, isn't it? Bringing together the greatest collection of Cape wines the UK's ever seen. I think that's me saying that, not you. When does it end? August sometime? It was 17th, is it, of August? We're recording this podcast on the 12th, and it comes out later this week. So there's still time to buy, right?
Yes. If people are listening to this when it comes out, then there will still be time to take part in the spotlight. It runs until Monday, the 17th of August. Yes. Yeah. We're in the 3rd week of it now. So what we have called our spotlight on South Africa, part of the Wine Society's new fine wine strategy. So we have effectively had, almost a complete takeover for the last 2.5 weeks, showcasing some of the most exciting producers in the Cape, and really telling the story of how we've got to this incredible, dynamic, modern fine wine scene, which is now pulsing in South Africa.
And there are lots of little mini offers within it. There's Chenin, because I bought some Chenin. What else have you done within the offer?
You bought quite a lot of Chenin, I think.
Yeah, I do.
So I basically, the way that it's structured around 6 themes or chapters or installments. They're not necessarily chronological, and they do intersect, but they are charting what I think are some of the most significant seismic shifts in South Africa in the last 50 years. So we opened with a deep dive into the Cape Chenin terroirs, as you mentioned, trying to cover all of those incredible different regions, which you and I would call sort of the premier cru and grand cru sites of Chenin in South Africa. We then moved on to the OG Swartlanders, so those Swartland revolutionaries that changed the face of Swartland, but also really redefine what fine wine was in the South African context. We then moved to what we called, not provocatively, but what we call South Africa's answer to Burgundy. And so a focus on the Cape South Coast more broadly, because it includes Lismore and Greyton and Radfordale and Elgin. But really the focus of it was on the Hemelanada and those 3 different appellations of the Hemelanada, which are just making the most incredible renditions of Chardonnay and Pinot. And then we went in with our first ever, and the UK's first ever, Stellenbosch en Primeur campaign. So from the 2025 vintage, focusing on Bordeaux blends, Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc. Then we did a spotlight on the next generation. So I had to draw the line somewhere. So there was just 13 producers, but 13 young producers in their 20s and 30s with independent labels who have got fewer than 10 vintages under their belt, but in many cases, maybe only 1 or 2 vintages under their belt. And some of these producers we brought into the UK for the first time as the Wine Society. And the final release is tomorrow. Well, when people listen to this, it will have been yesterday. Which is, I've called it The New Wave Comes of Age. You wrote a brilliant exploratory piece for us, tracking the journey of the New Wave back to 1974. But within this selection of wines, it is basically some of those great names of South Africa's New Wave, like Buchanut's like Loup Passon, like Reinecker, like Badenhorst, like Miles Mossop. And it's mature vintages from those producers.
So go online, folks. Get online and fill your boots. I have already. I've run out of money. I'm blaming you for making me spend all this money. Last couple of questions is what would be your advice to the next Victoria Mason? I mean, bearing in mind that not everyone has your limitless reserves of energy. But
no, I would throw that back and say, if you follow what you love, if you do what you love and what makes you tick and what gives you joy, that gives you endless energy. So be true to your passions. I had no idea 15 years ago that me studying wine was going to lead to me being where I am now. But I followed that, and it's given me so much energy. It's given me so much back.
And last question is, how do you get away from wine? I have a feeling the answer is going to include running, isn't it? Because you're a runner.
Definitely running, trail running wild for sure. Also hiking and walking. I've actually, in my older age now, I'm actually appreciating walking and moving at a slower pace, but I still love running first and foremost. And yoga as well. Yoga is just so good for me to kind of reset my nervous system and kind of calm down that energy, as you say.
And you're a great reader still, aren't you?
Of course, reading. Yes. I mean, reading is always there, but actually more and more nature, less fiction these days, more and more nature books, more and more books about how we interact with the natural world around us.
Fantastic. Well, it's been brilliant talking to you. When's your next trip to South Africa? You've just come back, haven't you?
I'm just back. So it won't be until next year, I don't think. Probably harvest next year.
Well, I'm sure they're waiting to see you. Anyway, they're looking forward to it. It's been brilliant talking to you. Thank you. What an amazing story. I mean, what you've achieved in 10 years is incredible. I think an inspiration to anybody listening. Think, I quite fancy being a wine buyer. It's not easy, folks. But as you said, if you follow your passions, you'll get there. Victoria, always a pleasure talking to you. And I'll see you very soon. I hope over a bottle of wine.
Thank you, Tim.
Wow. Where does Victoria get her energy from? That new South African range is something really special. Next time on Cork Talk, my guest will be Sandra Tavares from Wine and Soul in the Douro Valley. Join me then. Thanks for listening to Cork Talk. If you want to read more reports, articles and tasting notes by me, go to my website, timatkin.com. You can also follow me on Twitter @TimAtkin and on Instagram @TimAtkinMW. See you next week.